Hello everyone, welcome to the F-Group webinar. My name is Renee Chen and I'm your moderator today. In the next 40 minutes, we will introduce the Automotive Ethernet and show you how the firewall SecuGate ensures vehicle security in typical use cases. Please note that all participants are muted to avoid background noise. You are welcome to ask questions all the time during the presentation using the Q&A box. They will be answered afterwards. Please make sure you use the Q&A chat box on WebEx to ask all the questions, and they will be collected. So even if we run out of time today, we will still get back to you after the webinar. Now I would like to hand over the speaker role to Sid, who is the product manager of SecuGate. Sid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Renee. So, as Renee mentioned, that today we will focus on our solution SecuGate, which tells how we can secure automotive Ethernet with firewalls and routers. So we divided the agenda, or the whole webinar into multiple topics. First, we will focus on the trends in EE architecture. Then we will look into the benefits as well as the challenges which come when we start using Ethernet in the EE architecture. Later on, we will focus on how we can secure Ethernet-based EE architecture, followed by deep focus on firewall and router solution. Later on, we will look into the continuous protection, which is basically mentioning a complete intrusion detection and prevention system portfolio. And we will end the session with Q&A, where I will be happy to answer your questions. So looking into the trends in EE architecture. So what we see today is like, in the smart mobility trends that is transforming the automotive industry, we see these few functions which, I would say these words are being used are very popular and they're used a lot. For example, big data, electromobility, machine learning, connected functions, OEMs trying to sell mobility instead of cars, autonomous driving. So the key reason to mention this here is like these kind of new features or new developments in the automotive industry really demand high bandwidth or high amount of data communication inside the car. And to support this high data rate, the technology, the underlying in-vehicle network technology needs to be changed. And therefore, there was, we started using Ethernet more and more because it can offer us really high throughput and bandwidth. So why we are talking about firewall today, and what's the reason why we are talking about security in general? So what we have seen in past is that there have been really a lot of remote attacks which have been performed on vehicles, and that's started getting very popular from 2015 when Jeep was attacked remotely by two researchers. And then we saw the trend continue. Every year we saw, learned that, there was some vehicle which was attacked remotely, and this is not good for the consumer as well as for the OEM. The consequences there for the OEM is that you get really a lot of economic and reputation damage, which is not good. For example, in 2015, there was a very first security-related recall campaign for 1.4 million vehicles. Another reason is like mandatory legal requirements that could come into effect with, if the vehicle is attacked or something happens. And we need to follow some cybersecurity guidelines. So what here we focus more on some more topics with respect to requirements. So UNEC published some in the new document. They publish what could be required by vehicle manufacturer to sell their vehicle with respect to cybersecurity, and they really talk here about maybe firewall mechanism that could involve firewall, intrusion detections and prevention system, more like the backend where we send data and do things with the vehicle. Yeah, what we see on the right here is the picture from Miller and Walasek. So these are the people who hacked Jeep in 2015. So they are, I would say, one of the most experienced people in automotive cybersecurity. They published a recommendation last year at Black Hat. The recommendation was we should use network segregation as much as possible, which means we should divide our network in multiple zones. And then there needs to be a real-time detection and reaction vehicle, which means that we need firewall and intrusion detection systems. And they clearly mentioned that it's not only applicable for CAN, it's also valid for Ethernet. So we see here the trends in EE architecture. So what we see here yesterday was a really long time ago, where we had vehicles with CAN bus and no gateways. So and it had multiple small ECUs performing specific functions, and there was signal-based communication. What we see here in today was already yesterday for a lot of OEMs. So you use a central gateway for cross-domain communication in the CAN network, and then it also introduced some security with help of CAN firewall and SecOC. What we see here in tomorrow is already today for multiple OEMs. So just the way with CAN gateway, you had multiple domains with use of multiple CAN bus. We try to do something similar on Ethernet side. So you have Ethernet switch along with the CAN-based communication on the gateway, and then the Ethernet switch enforces network segregation or domain creation with help of VLANs. So basically it creates boundaries and creates domains. And then Ethernet is used as a backbone communication. So we use Ethernet and CAN together. So this EE architecture supports more security features, and also it started introducing more service-oriented communication. For example, some IP or similar. And also we started using more high-performance ECUs here. Yeah, we still see cyclic messages like CAN being used here, but yeah, it will take time. What we see here in future is like really, I would say, far future, not happening immediately. So we will have, we will be using Ethernet more and more. So what we see here is like multiple Ethernet switches trying to create a ring-based network. And the reason to use ring-based network here is to show redundancy. So if one of the links fails, then we can use the other path for communication. And this is how we can offer redundancy. And also this kind of architecture will introduce high-performance vehicle computers, which will use security-enhanced high-performance microprocessors. So now we will focus more on the benefit and challenges. So what we saw, is once upon a time everything was static and known in advance, which means, we really knew while the vehicle was being manufactured that what will be the communication, how the vehicle will behave in each and every scenario, and we clearly defined that. But now we see more and more dynamic communication policies due to over-the-air updates, remote feature activation, service-oriented communication, and this is really, making the network more complex. So we see that the vehicle, the policy of, for example, the firewall or the gateway or some other things can change even with respect to the state of vehicle. For example, we would like to establish an additional diagnostic VLAN when we go to the diagnostic mode, or we would like to change the state, the policy of the firewall when the vehicle is driving at less than, let's say, 20 kilometers per hour. So this is, really making things very complicated. Also, we see the infrastructure is getting more and more shared. So it's not as clear as before. So there will be mixed application on zones and vehicle computers. And this kind of the mixing or this will be done based on multiple factors. One is like zone separation, which can be based on either domain-based, so like you divide the vehicle into multiple domains like ADAS, infotainment, connectivity, or you take it in a trusted and non-trusted model. So yeah, and every OEM decides on one, and everything has its own pros and cons. Then we are using more virtualization to isolate applications, so access control to sensitive resources, and also side channel attacks on sensitive data. Then the isolation of communication. So there is mixed trustworthiness of network nodes. And then another challenge here is like whether we should enforce the communication policy centrally and or like it should be enforced more locally on an EC. So what we saw before is basically tells us that we are getting an ambiguous border. So we don't know where the border ends. So at one side, we talk about end-to-end protection, for example, with help of IPsec or TLS or maybe end-to-end MACsec. These are still very complicated things to do, really implement in a practical world. And on the other hand, we talk about firewall and IDS. So yeah, for some use cases, we can see there is end-to-end communication and end-to-end protection can be available, but not for everything. But when there is end-to-end communication and protection, then the firewall and IDS solution may not be able to inspect the traffic. And then an exploit of potential vulnerability becomes like very effective deeply inside the EE architecture. The second part is more talking about the local interfaces like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. So they are another attack surface or avenue. So the formal natural separation of network technologies within and beyond will be less strict in like the next generation EE architecture. So now we will talk more about challenges with respect to Ethernet. So we know the transition to Ethernet-based EE architecture brings us a lot of opportunities. But some challenge here, the impact here is that the development, testing, and integration with existing communication network is a little bit complex and difficult. And then this securing this heterogeneous network together with CAN and existing IVN technology is difficult, hard. Then on Ethernet, we see very broad variance of protocol landscape and routing schemes. So it's not simple as CAN. So you have too many different protocols like TCP, UDP, IPv4 or IPv6, some IP, diagnostic over IP, ICMP. So it's like too many different ways to communicate. And so when you implement firewall or intrusion detection, you really need to be flexible, and it should support inspection in all these protocols. And then also on Ethernet, we use different kind of routing schemes, like it could be based on MAC address or it could be based on IP address. So we need to ensure that we support that. Then the introduction of TCP or some IP like protocols on Ethernet basically allows state and service-based communication. So it's not as simple as you just broadcast the message to everyone or you just send it and get done with it. It's state or connection-based protocol. So you need to establish a connection and then follow some state machine, I would say, and then communicate according to that state machine. And it increases the complexity of the network. And we, as a security solution for like firewall and IDS, you need to be able to inspect it, really manage the state, monitor the state, and this increases the complexity of the security solution, and also it consumes higher resources. The system is prone to attack, so it's quite similar to CAN, the difference here is like Ethernet has been in industry from a long time, especially in the IT industry. Therefore, we see very well documented literature with respect to Ethernet. We have a lot of easily available hacking tools that could be used to attack your car easily. We just need a tool from the IT side. And then there are a lot of existing potential attacks from the IT world which could be used as it is on Ethernet. Another challenge here we see is like on Ethernet, we see very highly increased data rate and payload size, which means that if we are using firewall, it needs to be very high performance intensive. So it should inspect packet at a very high speed, else, yeah, it will create a bottleneck. As on one side, Ethernet is offering us high bandwidth, but if we are not able to process it fast, then there is a problem. Then the remote and external connectivity of vehicles. So we, with respect to that, I mean, we get different filtering requirements based on if the communication is going to the outer world or to the inner world. And then we have more complex and comprehensive key management. The decision on the level of security is also difficult to decide. So for some use cases, we may like to have the firewall solution sitting centrally in an ECU like gateway, but for some other solutions, we may like to put it in end ECUs. And then also we see some challenges with respect to time synchronization protocol on Ethernet. So there are way too many standards for time synchronization or TSN, ABB, PTP, and we need, there are too many different options. And one protocol can maybe satisfy our latency and timing requirements, but we need some other protocol to satisfy our bandwidth requirements. So it's quite complicated as it's still a work in progress as part of the standard. So there are, and then as there are too many different standards for available, securing them is also application specific. So how should we secure the architecture here? So our standard, if we follow the onion-based model where we secure multiple layers and do defense in depth, we can first look into like securing connected vehicles or the connected parts of the vehicle. So we secure the channels with TLS, IPsec. We secure the endpoints. So we secure the endpoint authentication. And we can use firewall and IDS there. Then we look more into the E architecture. So we must be able to secure the E architecture with help of establishing trust boundaries with VLANs or the domain enforcement. And gateway is one ECU which can really make that happen. So the firewall, as part of firewall, we also consider it as an entity which also takes care of VLAN enforcement. So it creates multiple zones or boundaries. Then if we look into the securing the in-vehicle communication, so it's really, we talk about how we secure the communication happening inside the vehicle. So we protect the integrity of critical in-vehicle signals. An example is SecOC on AUTOSAR. And then we come to securing the individual ECUs. So how we go to a specific ECU level and secure it. So we can focus on things, components like hardware security modules or ways to protect integrity of ECU software and data. We must look into secure diagnostics, secure flashing, secure boot. These are some security related state of art that must be followed. And then using firewall and intrusion detection system at that ECU level. And often what we see is the attack surface or the attack way we see is like it's always taken us from top to down, but this is not always true. It can, we may start from the ECU level and explore more and more about the vehicle and go to the top level. So with layered security approach, what we learned is like with Ethernet as well, it is possible to secure the vehicle with the same onion model with the layered security approach, even with Ethernet-based architecture, just like the CAN. So we need to follow some state-of-art respect to security requirements. We should disable unused ports. We should use secure boot. We can use hardware security module for secure key storage, some end-to-end encryption for some communication, and then firewall, router, and intrusion detection are really key components to secure this kind of modern next-generation architecture. Now stepping into our product, CycleGate, which is basically firewall and router. So here what I would like to really first explain what firewall and router is. So firewall is a component which is used to block illegitimate communication to individual ECU or to the entire network. A router is a component which is used to enforce the communication flow, which means, so if a firewall looks into a packet, inspects it, and decides this packet looks good or this packet looks bad, what to do next with the packet is decided by the router. Maybe you would like to send it to some other ECU, maybe you would like to send it for logging. There could be multiple decisions on that. And that part is taken care by the router. So our product CycleGate includes firewall and router. The third part here that I mentioned is intrusion detection system, or IDS. So it detects anomaly and creates intrusion report. This is not part of our standard product CycleGate, but we offer it as an additional module on top of CycleGate. So we have two versions of the product. One is the switch-based version, which focuses on Ethernet switches, the automotive Ethernet switches, and it is supported by, I would say, special switches, which are available now very commonly by almost all the semiconductor vendors in the automotive industry for switch. And the condition here is that we also need access to the CPU inside the switch. So we call it smart switch. So in this version of the product, the switch-based version, we get the whitelist or blacklist or the communication policy from you as customer, and then CycleGate generates two binaries or two, I would say, two parts. One part goes to the switch core here, and this does all the hardware pre-configuration. So it includes configuring TCAMs, and that is ternary content addressable memory. So this really offers high-speed inspection. So everything which is processed in TCAM is done at wire speed, but it is very limited and it's very expensive. So it's limited, so therefore it cannot cover everything in your communication policy. So we use it in a way that it assists the software which runs on the CPU. So yeah, the hardware configuration part also configures the MAC address table. It also does the VLAN configuration and other basic switch configurations which are important from a security perspective, like maybe disabling some ports which are not used, or maybe looking into some other security requirements. The second part of the binary is here, which is the software which runs on the CPU. So the way CycleGate works is that the hardware and software, they work together. So we call it as a hardware and software co-design. So the hardware assists the software to process packets at a high speed. So on the hardware side, we see a limitation that, it's first of all very limited number of TCAMs, and we cannot do much. And then the second thing is the hardware cannot do anything which is stateful. So these kind of state machines or logging or more detailed inspection are done by the software. So together, when the hardware configuration and the software running on the CPU work together, they can help us to achieve good performance as well as offer sophisticated firewalling schemes. What we see on the right side is what we call it as a host microcontroller based version. It can run on microcontrollers or microprocessors. And this is C library which could be integrated into any ECU. And so the switch-based version can be used in the ECUs which have Ethernet switches. But there will be ECUs which don't have Ethernet switch, and they have just one or two Ethernet interfaces, and you would like to put firewall there, and there the host-based version of firewall will fit in. And also there could be some, I would say, use cases where you are not able to do much on the switch due to some limitation. Then you can use the host-based version of our product to inspect packet in the host microcontroller or processor. Coming to the router first. So as I mentioned before, router is the component which decides what to do next with the packet. So yeah, an Ethernet switch is used to create network zones for vehicle E architecture, but a router is a component which connects those network zones. So in the picture here, we show some domains like ADAS, infotainment, or diagnostic or IP. And the communication between those domains always go through a router. CycleGate supports multiple address translation or routing schemes. It could be VLAN translation, which could be required for cross-domain communication, MAC address translation, IP address translation, port number translation, depending on your routing policies. And also, we can also extend it to advanced proxy-based communication, where you would like the router to act as a proxy for some communication. The second part here is the firewall, which is used to block illegitimate communication. So here we talk about, as we see in the picture, it's on Ethernet we have way too many different protocols. So it's complex and really complicated to secure this network because you need to support, I would say, all of the protocols. So we took approach where we generate software only for the part of the protocols which are being used by you. For example, you can use IPv4 and IPv6 with some IP and diagnostic over IP, and that is all for which we will generate the binary. And so we took a modular approach here. So with our solution, you can protect against denial of service attacks at the lower layers. You can maintain and enforce separation of network segments using VLANs. It is possible to establish and preserve communication domains on all layers of Ethernet and IP stack, which means that we have a coverage from the lower layer to up to the application layer. So you can look into predefined static fields in the packet, and that can be termed as stateless packet filter. So you can really look into static header fields like MAC address, IP address, or port numbers of UDP or some other things. Then the second kind of filtering scheme that we offer is stateful packet inspection. So, and it is specifically valid for stateful protocols like TCP. So in TCP, you have a client and server-based communication. So the client first needs to establish a connection with server before it can communicate. And after this connection is established, the state of connection changes dynamically during runtime. So it always changes, and according to the standard now, RFC 793, it's defined how the state can change. And if the state is not changing that way, then there could be an attack on the network. An example of attack on TCP could be SYN flooding or SYN-ACK flooding. So these kind of dynamic behavior inspection are handled by our stateful packet inspection module. And then the third part comes in, which is called deep packet inspection. Still vague because it could be, a deep packet inspection could be maybe looking into the payload, or it could be looking into higher layer protocols like detail, look into diagnostic over IP or some IP. But yeah, this is supported. And also for specific use cases, it is possible to look into the payload of the packet. Then the communication policy enforcement is based on authentic rule sets and allows both kind of filters, whitelist and blacklist. So with whitelist, we can explicitly define the communication flow. With blacklist, we can prevent the known attacks. So we can configure the network in both ways. So some key benefits. So This here is an example of a central gateway where you have a microcontroller connected to the CAN part of the network of the e-architecture and an Ethernet switch, which is an inbuilt CPU. So if we would like to introduce a firewall, a typical solution that comes to our mind is, just put it in the microcontroller. But when we were working with it, we realized it has some limitations. One limitation is that the microcontroller was always loaded with more software, so adding more was not that easy. Second part was the link between microcontroller and the switch. So usually the microcontroller is connected to the switch using an Ethernet interface, and that Ethernet interface can be a bottleneck because it can be a 100 megabit interface or gigabit. Good if it is gigabit, but not common. So basically the bandwidth that the link can offer is basically your packet processing capability. So this is also a bottleneck. And the third part is, if we implement the firewall solution in this microcontroller, then every packet which arrives to the switch will first have to travel to this microcontroller, get processed, then come back. And then in this kind of architecture, we will have a lot of cross-chip latency because all the packets will first have to travel to that external CPU and come back. So we took an approach where instead of putting the firewall there, we added the firewall to Ethernet switch. So the key benefits of the switch-based version is that you achieve high performance with a good hardware and software co-design in the switch, which means that the hardware assists the software to process packets at a higher speed. There is no interference with an ECU microcontroller, or NDCU, as the solution can run independently completely on the switch. It does not need any other support. This kind of design is independent and scalable, which means that if the OEM decides to use 10 Ethernet switches in the E architecture, you just configure Cykagate for it and everything is handled. You don't need to do much. It's easy to integrate because you are running an individual solution, so you don't need to always integrate it to a new microcontroller in ECU. So it's basically, at the end, offers a low-cost integration for the customer. The microcontroller-based version is basically, the benefit here is that, if you don't have a switch in your ECU, that part can also be secured with firewall without this microcontroller-based version. The overall benefit of the product is that it covers the complete OSI stack. So we don't only talk about inspecting at layer 2 or layer 3. We can really inspect at the application layer if needed, or we can be very selective with respect to the protocols, like some IP. It can be used as a library, so it's possible to run your own software on top of Cykagate. We can provide an API for that. This system has been developed keeping Ethernet IDS or Ethernet intrusion detection system in mind. So you can classify packets whether it should go as a firewall path, which means that it should instantly take a decision, drop it or allow it, or it should go into a monitoring mode path where you really say, I want to just inspect packet but not drop it. So and as I mentioned before, we do offer some intrusion detection modules on top of our product cycle. This is a rule-based approach, so it's efficient, deterministic, and when done by experts. So of course you need experts in this area who really know how to work with e-architecture as well. Know about the vehicles, and also they know how to work with Ethernet. They configure these rules. And then the customer really knows what is happening with their system, because there is nothing new, unknown. Everything is known by the customer, what will happen with respect to the policies. And then our product offers automatic generation of basic rule sets based on whitelist. And then you can do further changes and optimizations. Looking into the implementation and platforms. So on the left we see more of how the overall picture looks like, that we in switch core or hardware we configure IDS and firewall related settings for the hardware, And then on the software side, on the CPU, we run the engine for a firewall and IDS. Now, what is important here is to look into what switch platforms we support or we plan to support. So currently we support Marvell 88Q5050 and 5054. Other switches like from Marvell it is called Spruce. From Broadcom we have Scorpio and Leo. Something else from Realtek and other from NXP. These are the switches which are under consideration. So we plan to support. We have them in our roadmap. We need to prioritize what to support first and what to support later based on I would say customer requests or other factors. What is important here is also the last part, which is generic C library, including support for ISO 15118 firewalls. So this is our software-only version of firewall, which is the C library I showed before for Host Micro. So this will be available this summer, from this summer onwards. ISO 15118 here is standard for electric vehicle charging. So, the electric vehicle charging communication also happens over Ethernet. So we try to cover with that area as well with our host-based firewall. So looking into the full picture, so firewall is part of our the complete intrusion detection and prevention system portfolio. It's one of the components. If we look into the complete component overview, it involves firewall, which is FileGate. Second part is intrusion detection system. Third part is the backend, which will basically receive all the intrusion reports. And the fourth part is the Cyber Defense Center or Security Operations Center, where we have people who work with those security incidents. In this example, we show that an attacker is able to misuse a zero-day exploit, and security is not obsolete. So OEM secure flashing implementation was vulnerable, and therefore the attacker was able to flash and run some code and send some malicious signals. When this is sent, the malicious signal is sent inside the vehicle. The firewall, based on its policy, comes to know that this is not the right signal, it's not allowed. So it blocks the communication and it informs the IDS, intrusion detection system, that something is wrong. So the firewall basically already offers protection here, and the attacker is not able to control other ECUs. Then the intrusion detection system detects the anomaly, and it creates an intrusion report. It is sent to the backend, where there is monitoring done and more analysis is done. At the Security Operations Center, the forensic experts, the real security experts, analyze it, and they come to know, okay, this was the problem. They identify the vulnerability, and they come up with a patch. And then, using the connected over-the-air updates, this patch is sent to the entire vehicle fleet. And this is the way how we can really secure the complete chain is established. And in this way, we do secure the vehicle not only during the production or SOP, but we really cover security in the entire vehicle lifecycle. So this was, I would say, the end of slide from my side. I would be really happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sid, for the presentation. Now let's start the Q&A with this question. So you have mentioned in your slides that you have two variants of your product, one running in switch, another one in ECU. So could you explain more what is the advantage of doing so?
Yeah, sure. So, if we have a system where there is a switch and microcontroller both, the preference will be to run it in the switch, because this is, the switch has access to all packets, so it knows the complete packet flow. the switch has a lot of hardware acceleration features. So if we have our solution, the firewall and router running in the switch, then we can really process it at a very high speed. So we can meet a lot of, I would say, requirements with respect to throughput, bandwidth, latency, because everything is available in the switch, and the switch has the hardware acceleration features like TCAM. So yeah, that's the benefit, I would say.
Thank you. Second part of the question, for switch-based solution, do you only use TCAM in switch? What do you use the CPU for? How is it efficient?
Yeah, so the TCAM or TCAM, the content and addressable memory in the switch hardware is really limited. So what we see common in the market is, like in most of the switches, we have 256 TCAM rules available, and maybe you have 500 or 1,000 communication policies. So you can never cover everything in TCAM. That's one limitation. And also TCAM is very expensive. So the switch manufacturer will never include like way too many TCAMs, else the price will go really high. Then the second major part is that we are talking about dynamic policies in the network. So the hardware can only handle static policies. The TCAM can handle only basic static policies like looking into some static fields in the packet. But when we move to stateful inspection, where the state of connection changes dynamically during runtime, or we would like to go into deep packet inspection, it cannot be done in TCAMs. So our solution combines the inspection in TCAM with software running on the CPU. So the state machine runs in the CPU, and this dynamic behavior in the CPU is combined with static checks in the TCAM, and then yeah, together it's an efficient solution. If we try to use just one, it won't be an efficient one.
Thank you. Got another question here. Could you please share the presentation slides via email? The recording of this webinar will be online later, and we will send you or an email to the link. So yeah, the material will be available, and you can also find the flyer of SecureGate and more information on our homepage. Next question. Could you please give some rough ideas on performance numbers?
That's a really good question. So it highly depends on the platform we are using. So what switch we are using, also if we are using a switch or microcontroller. So yeah, it's really hard to tell that immediately that what performance you will have, but I can give some rough numbers, rough ideas. So depending on how big packet size, I mean, also the performance changes a lot. If you are using on Ethernet, you can have like 1,518 byte packet, as well as you can have 72 byte packet. So depending on what size of packet you use, the performance will change drastically. So if we talk about, let's say, 1,518 byte packet, you can easily achieve more than 420 or 30 megabits per second in the switch-based design for really stateful packet inspection on TCP combined with some IP protocol. And here we are really talking about inspecting everything from the very lower layer up to the some IP layer, and also looking into the link between the lower layer and the top layer, verifying the length. Basically, you are verifying way too much, and you will achieve something like 420, 430, but it's a rough number, I mean. So depending on the specific use case, if any of our audiences have a question specific to this, I would be happy to answer that directly. Yeah. And another aspect of this is like how many frames per second you can process. So again, it's a rough number. I would say something like depending again on what switch we have and how we process it. But if we process it in CPU or some IP kind of packets, maybe 35 to 40,000. But yeah, it's really rough. So I would like, yeah, the audience to directly get in contact with me for that.
I see. Next question, what is the benefit of using Secure Gate Firewall compared to our standard Linux solutions such as NF tables?
Yeah, so yeah, basically you're talking about IP tables on Linux. So we are really talking about two completely different systems. So on Linux, I mean, Secure is really focusing on, the major focus is on raw packets, vehicle traffic, where we don't have, at most of the places we don't have Linux, but we have like some kind of AUTOSAR-based OS or some other things. But here at Secure, we are really sitting somewhere centrally in a system, like a switch. We have access to everything, every packet, and we inspect the packet at a very raw level. So we inspect up to a bit and byte level. At IP table in Linux, yeah, it's easily configurable. It is only available for Linux systems, not other systems. But yeah, you really don't talk about raw packets. So yeah, so it's a complete, I would say, a big difference in the platform we are using, and also another thing is like, platform and then the kind of system you're using, and also having access to raw packets or having access to some packets which already went through our Ethernet stack, and then we have it available at the application level. So there are too many things. So for the switch-based version of our packet, it directly has access to all the raw packets. It processes it and it will send it to its destination. For our microcontroller-based version, the C library needs to be integrated to the very lower, I would say, we call it Ethernet interface, the transceiver level, where it will have access to those raw packets. If it allows, it thinks it's right, then only it will travel through the Ethernet stack. So yeah, I would say technology-wise, it's a difference. So, but we can have more detailed discussion on that.
What security vulnerability the Ethernet protocol can have in terms of in-vehicle security issues?
That's a good question, but I would, there are many, but it's a really detailed question. I think the audience who asked this question, I would like to have maybe a session with that person, and we can go more into details for that.
Yeah, it seems like a big question. We probably don't have that much time today, but I see another question. Is there a software version for a UPECU, no TCAM?
A software version for switch or microcontroller or processor? Can you repeat your question?
You could see that in chat. That's the last question.
Okay.
Is there a software version for UPECU? Could you please elaborate?
I'm trying to look into the question. Just give me a second. So the question is, is there a software version for a microprocessor ECU and no TCAM? Yeah, so our C library-based version can be integrated both to microcontroller as well as microprocessors. So it's possible.
Great. New questions coming up. Why do we use Ethernet protocol compared to CAN protocol?
So as during my slides, I went to the trends in e-architecture slide, so with CAN, we have really limited bandwidth. So with all these, I would say, the new evolving technology in the automotive industry, which demands high data rate, it's not possible to handle that much data rate with CAN. So Ethernet, as a technology, offers us really high data rate, like maybe 100 mbits per second or gigabit as well, or maybe 2.5 gig if needed. So this high throughput and bandwidth cannot be supported by the CAN network. Ethernet is, I would say, default as well as a tested choice, which has been in the IT industry from a very long time.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have today. Thank you for joining the webinar. Feel free to go to script.com to find more information about SecureGate Firewall and subscribe to our newsletter. Stay tuned, as we do have more webinars coming up on the topic of automotive cybersecurity. The recording of the webinar, like I said before, will also be available online later. You guys should receive an email with a link to it. So please stay up to date with us via email or social media. I'd like to thank you again and wish you all a nice day. Bye.